She threw his phone into the pool in front of 200 people, and then she leaned close enough that only he could hear it over the music, and she said 5 words that she would remember for the rest of her life. "No one's coming to save you." She was smiling when she said it. Everyone at that party was smiling. They watched the phone hit the water and sink this quiet, ordinary man in a plain black shirt who had dared to show up to their world, and they laughed the easy laugh of people who have never once in their lives been the ones without power. What none of them knew, what she especially did not know, was that the phone she had just drowned had been in the middle of a call. And the 12 black SUVs that were at that very moment turning through the gates at the bottom of the drive, headlights cutting the dark, were not coming to save him. They belonged to him. Stay with me, because you are about to watch the single most expensive mistake a woman ever made at her own engagement party. And if you love a story where the quiet one turns out to be the last person in the room, you should have crossed. Do me a favor right now, hit subscribe and ring that bell, because the platform buries these, and you are the only reason they surface. His name was Elias Cole, and for 6 months, the woman he loved had let her entire world believe he was a nobody. That was the arrangement, though the word arrangement makes it sound cleaner than it was. Elias had met Simone Vance 8 months earlier, and he had met her as a version of himself that almost no one alive got to see. No title, no company name, no security detail, no reputation, walking into the room 3 steps ahead of him. I had met her as a man in a plain shirt at the wedding of a mutual friend, a man who fixed the caterer's blown fuse himself. Rather than wait for someone to be called a man who made her laugh so hard, she snorted wine, which she had never done in front of anyone and was mortified about, and which he found. He told her the most beautiful thing he had seen all year. She did not know what he did. He told her he worked in logistics, which was technically true the way saying the ocean is some water is technically true. And here's the thing you have to understand about Elias Cole, and it is the crack that this whole story pours through. He had wanted desperately for one relationship in his life to be about him and not about the empire. He had been rich for a long time. He had learned the hard and expensive way that money is a kind of fog. It gets between you and every person you meet, and you can never quite tell whether they are smiling at you or at the fog. So when Simone Vance looked at a man in a plain shirt and seemed to like him anyway, Elias made a decision that he believed was romantic, and that was in truth a test he had dressed up as romance. He decided not to tell her. Not yet. He wanted to be loved as a nobody first, to understand why a man would do something so strange, so self-defeating. As hiding a fortune from the woman he loved, you have to understand where Elias Cole came from and where the fog first rolled in. He had not been born to any of it. He had been born in a 2-room flat above a laundry to a mother who pressed other people's shirts for a living and a father who left before Elias could remember his face. He had gotten out the only way that world lets you out, which is by being relentless in a way that frightens comfortable people. He started with 1 truck. A single second-hand truck. He could barely make the payments on hauling freight. Nobody else wanted to haul sleeping in the cab between runs. I had lost that truck once and gotten it back. He had learned the freight business from the axle up, and then he had learned the thing that actually makes money, which is not moving the boxes but owning the roads. The boxes move on the warehouses, the routes, the contracts, the debt underneath all of it. 22 years of 18-hour days had turned 1 truck into a fleet, and the fleet into a network, and the network into an empire so quiet and so structural that most people used it every day without ever hearing its name. And somewhere in those 22 years, the fog rolled in. The first time Elias understood what money does to the people around you, he was 31, and he was engaged to a woman named Priya. And he loved her the uncomplicated way you can only love someone once. He had thought she loved him. Then his first big deal closed, the one that made him properly rich for the first time, and he came home to tell her, and he watched her eyes change, and he spent the next 2 years slowly, sickeningly realizing that the woman had recalibrated, that every conversation now had a price tag underneath it, that she had begun managing him the way you manage an asset. When it finally ended, her lawyer's letter arrived faster than her goodbye. He was never able to prove she had married the money instead of the man, but he was never able to unfeel it either. And after that, every warm smile came to him through a haze, and he could never be sure ever again whether the person was smiling at him or at the fog around him. That is the wound, That is why a grown, brilliant, powerful man does something as foolish as hiding who he is from the woman he wants to marry. He wasn't testing Simone because he was cruel. I was testing her because he was terrified, and because one time long ago the fog had taken everything from him, and he had sworn it would never take him by surprise again. For a while with Simone, it was the best thing that had ever happened to him. Simone was quick and funny and ambitious, and she came from money, real inherited money the Vance family having built and then coasted on a hospitality and real estate fortune for 3 generations. She lived in a world of galas and yachts and the specific casual cruelty of people who have never had to be kind to anyone in order to eat. Elias found it fascinating the way you find a nature documentary fascinating. He did not belong to it and did not want to, and it did not occur to him at first that Simone might belong to it more than she belonged to him. The signs were there. He chose not to read them. She would introduce him at parties as Elias, my little project, and laugh, and everyone would laugh, and he told himself it was affectionate. She would suggest gently that maybe he could do more with himself, that her father could find something for him. She flinched once when he arrived at a restaurant she liked wearing the plain shirt and steered them to a corner table, and he noticed the flinch and filed it away and forgave it because he was in love, and love is the most sophisticated fog of all. The Vance family did not like him. They did not bother to hide it. Simone's father, Gregory Vance, a big, florid man who ran the family holdings with the confidence of the 3rd-generation heir who has never actually had to build anything, treated Elias with a contempt so total it circled back around into a kind of comedy. He would forget Elias's name on purpose. He would talk about him in the 3rd person while Elias was standing right there. Simone's little friend, he called him, the logistics fellow. Once at a dinner, Gregory had made Elias wait at the door for 20 minutes to see if there was room, while the family finished their soup, and Simone had said nothing, and Elias had stood in the marble foyer of a house that could have fit inside one wing of a building he owned, and he had smiled and waited, and something in his chest had gone very quiet and very cold. He should have known then. He is the first to say he should have known then. But the human heart does not want to know things like that, and so Elias kept telling himself the story he preferred, that Simone was different underneath, that the family was the problem, and she was the prisoner, that if he was patient, the real Simone would choose him over the fog. He kept the secret of who he was like a card held against his chest, telling himself he was protecting the love when what he was really doing was giving her one last chance to love him for free before he made it impossible to tell. The party was for their engagement. Elias had proposed a month earlier on a nothing evening, no ring, the size of a doorknob, no photographer, just the 2 of them, and a cheap bottle of wine and a question asked with a shaking voice, and she had said yes and cried, and for one night he had believed with his whole heart that he had done it, that he had found the one person who loved the man and not the fog. Then her mother took over the engagement party, and the guest list swelled to 200, and the venue became the family's summer estate, and Elias watched over the following weeks as the private thing he had proposed turned into a public spectacle for a world he was not part of, and he felt the card against his chest getting heavier and hotter, and he still, God help him, said nothing. The estate was the kind of place designed to make a certain kind of person feel small. A limestone mansion lit gold against the night, a pool the size of a small lake glowing blue lined with white couches and burning torches, uniformed staff moving through the crowd with trays, a band, 200 beautiful people in tuxedos and gowns that cost more than cars, all of them, Vances or Vance adjacent, all of them, there to celebrate an engagement that most of them privately regarded as a mistake the family would soon correct. Elias arrived in a plain black shirt, no tie, and he watched 200 people clock the shirt and file him instantly into the category they had already prepared for him. The humiliations that night were not one big thing. They never are. They are 100 small things, each one deniable, each one something you would sound crazy complaining about, which is exactly how that kind of cruelty protects itself. When Elias arrived, the valet assumed he was staff and directed him to the service entrance, and 3 of Simone's cousins found this so funny they retold it twice. At the bar, a man Elias had never met clapped him on the shoulder and said, "So you're the logistics guy. Tell me, do you drive the trucks yourself or just, arrange them?" And laughed before Elias could answer because the question had never been a question. "A woman in emerald," asked Simone in front of Elias in the tone people use for a slightly embarrassing pet. "And where did you find him?" And Simone had said, "Oh, he sort of found me." and everyone had laughed, and Elias had stood there holding a drink he did not want, and smiling, the smile he had spent his whole life learning to smile. He watched Simone the whole night, and this is the part that hurt worst afterward. She was happiest, most herself, most radiant, precisely in the moments she was performing his smallness for the crowd. She glowed when they laughed at him. She was feeding him to the pack a little at a time all evening, and calling it charm, and Elias kept waiting through every course for her to catch his eye across the table, and let him know just with a look that she was on his side, that the two of them were in on a joke against these ridiculous people, rather than the crowd being in on a joke against him. The look never came. She was not on his side. She had never been on his side. She was one of them, and the engagement had not made him one of them. It had only given them a new toy. By 9 o'clock the card against his chest was so hot he could barely breathe, and still he said nothing, because a part of him, the 31-year-old part, the part that had read a lawyer's letter before a goodbye, needed to see how far she would go. Now I want you to notice something, because it is the hinge the whole night turns on. Elias Cole was not the powerless man everyone in that garden took him for. He was one of the wealthiest people any of them would ever be in a room with. He could have bought the Vance family's entire holdings with a fraction of what his logistics group cleared in a good quarter, could have written the check without calling anyone. Every single person mocking him that night was financially a small planet orbiting a sun they could not see. And he let them. That was the terrible quiet power of it, and Elias did not fully understand yet why he was letting them, only that he was waiting for something, some final piece of evidence, some last answer to a question he had been too afraid to ask out loud. The question was simple. If it all fell apart, if the fog lifted and he was revealed as nothing would Simone stand next to him, or would she stand with them? He got his answer at 9:41. The call came in on his phone, and it was not a call he could ignore, because Elias Cole did not carry a phone for fun. On the other end was the head of his group's legal and security operations, a woman named Renata Ose, who had worked for him for 11 years and who did not call him at parties unless something had moved. And something had moved. A deal. Elias had spent 2 years and an enormous amount of quiet money assembling had just gone live. His group had completed the acquisition of a distressed portfolio of hospitality and real estate assets from a bank that had been carrying them as bad debt. Elias had bought the debt at a steep discount, the way you do, and the portfolio he now controlled included at its rotten center the over-leveraged, quietly failing holdings of the Vance family, who had been borrowing against their own name for a decade to keep the yachts and the galas afloat, and who had 3 months ago defaulted on a loan they did not know Elias's group now owned. He had not planned it as revenge. I want to be clear about that, because it matters. Elias had bought the portfolio months before the engagement as a business decision, before he had any idea the Vance holdings were tangled in it. The Vance stake was a small line item his analyst had flagged, and he had barely registered. I had learned only 3 weeks earlier, reviewing the file, that the woman he was going to marry was the daughter of a man who now, without knowing it, owed him everything, whose empire was a balloon and whose finger Elias's group was holding the pin to. He had not decided what to do about it. That was the truth. He had sat on the knowledge sick with it, because he did not want the answer to be what he was afraid it was. So when Renata called at 9:41 to tell him the acquisition had cleared and the board wanted a decision on the Vance position, I want to morning, Elias stepped away from the crowd toward the edge of the glowing pool, and he took the call, and he said quietly, "Renata, I need 10 minutes, I'm going to." And that was when Simone crossed the terrace. Drink in hand, cheeks flushed, and she saw him on the phone at their engagement party, murmuring about logistics and something in her. Some accumulated shame that had been building all night, as her friends whispered, snapped. "Are you serious?" Her voice cut across the music. Heads turned. "You're taking a work call at our engagement party. Simone, I just need 1 minute. It's important. It's important." She laughed, and it was not a kind laugh. And 200 people were watching now, and Gregory Vance was smiling from beside the bar, and Elias felt the whole garden lean in. "What's important?" "Elias, a shipping schedule, a truck." She held out her hand. "Give me the phone." "Simone, give it to me." She was smiling. That was the thing he could never unremember afterward, that she was smiling, playing to the crowd, and the crowd was with her. "You know what your problem is? You don't know how to be here, in my world. You never have. You're always halfway out the door on the phone in that shirt." She plucked the phone out of his hand before he could stop her, and she held it up, and the garden held its breath, and she said to the crowd, more than to him, "This is what's important to Elias Cole." And she threw it into the pool. It arced through the torchlight and hit the blue water with a small final splash, and it sank. And 200 people burst out laughing, the pure, delighted laughter of a pack that has found the weakest member and is enjoying the kill. Gregory Vance laughed loudest. Simone stood at the edge of the pool, glowing victorious, the most beautiful she had looked all night, and she leaned in close to Elias, close enough that only he could hear, and she said the 5 words, "No one's coming to save you. I need you to sit in that silence with him for a second, because everyone reading this has stood at least once in some version of that garden, holding some version of that card against your chest, learning in real time exactly how the person you loved would treat you the moment they believed you were powerless. That is the most information you will ever receive about a human being, and it always, always arrives too late to protect your heart and just in time to protect your life." Elias Cole did not shout. He did not lunge for the pool. He stood very still, and he looked at Simone, and then he looked past her over her shoulder, down the long, dark curve of the drive toward the gates, where 12 pairs of headlights had just appeared, moving up the drive in a slow, deliberate line like something out of a dream she had not agreed to have. She did not understand what she was looking at. Why would she? To Simone Vance, headlights coming up the family drive meant late guests or a caterer or one of her father's business people. She turned back to Elias, still riding the high of her own performance, still smiling, and she waited for him to crumble, because that was what men in plain shirts did when you humiliated them in front of 200 people. They crumbled, they begged, they made a scene that let everyone feel superior all over again. Elias did not crumble. That was the first thing that frightened her, though she could not yet have said why. He simply stood there, dripping calm, watching the lights come up the drive over her shoulder, and on his face was an expression she had never seen on him since 8 months, an expression that did not belong to the man she thought she knew, and it took her a moment to name it, and when she named it, her stomach dropped because the expression was grief. He was not angry. He was grieving. He was looking at her the way you look at someone at a funeral, and the person in the coffin, she slowly understood, was them. He had told Renata he needed 10 minutes. When the call cut out, drowned in the pool, standard protocol kicked in the protocol, he himself had designed years ago after a security incident. If the principal's line goes dead unexpectedly during an active operation, you do not call back. You come. Renata had a team on standby 40 minutes away, because a deal of this size does not close without the principal reachable, and the moment his phone went to black water, her people were already moving. If this is the part where you feel the hair on your arms stand up, take 1 second and hit that subscribe button, because we build these stories on faith that you want them, and your tap is the whole vote. Now watch what pulls through the gate. The SUVs came up the drive in a slow, disciplined line and stopped in formation on the great gravel apron in front of the mansion, and their doors opened, and men and women in dark suits stepped out. Unhurried, professional, the specific calm of people who are very good at a job. Most of these party guests had only ever seen in films. They did not run. They did not draw anything. They simply arranged themselves, and the leader of them, a tall woman in a charcoal suit with an earpiece, walked directly across the terrace, through the parting, confused crowd, straight to the man in the plain black shirt, and she stopped in front of him and said clearly in a voice that carried, "Mr. Cole, we lost your line. Are you secure?" The word "sir" is a small word, but in the right silence it can go off like a bomb. 200 people who had been laughing 30 seconds ago went absolutely still. Simone's smile was still on her face, but it had begun to come apart at the edges the way a photograph curls when you hold it too near a flame. Gregory Vance set down his drink. "I'm secure, Renata," Elias said quietly. "Stand the team down. There's no threat here." He looked at Simone when he said the last part. There was never a threat here. There was just a phone in a pool. "Copy," Renata said. She did not stand the team down. She stepped back exactly 1 pace and folded her hands, which is a different thing, and every professional in that formation understood it, and slowly so did the crowd. "Elias," Simone's voice had changed. The performance was gone from it. Underneath was something small and scrambling. "Who are these people?" "They work for me," Elias said. "You work in logistics." "I do work in logistics." He almost smiled. Almost. "I move about 4% of this country's freight, Simone. I own the company that owns the company your family flies charter with. I own a great many things. He glanced at the pool where his phone lay somewhere in the blue. I owned that phone. It's fine. There's a spare in the car. There's always a spare. Around the pool, the crowd had begun to change. It is an extraordinary thing to watch, and Elias watched it with the cold clarity of a man who had seen it before. The same 200 people who had been laughing at him 90 seconds earlier were now one by one rearranging their faces. The man who had asked whether Elias drove the trucks himself was suddenly very interested in his own shoes. The woman in emerald had gone the color of milk. A ripple of whispered recognition was moving through the garden as someone, and then several someones put the name together. Cole, the freight thing, the fund that's not as that. And Elias could see the exact moment. Each face understood, because each face performed the identical journey from contempt to calculation in about 2 seconds flat. That was the fog arriving all at once, rolling in over 200 people in real time. 30 seconds ago he had been a man in a plain shirt. Now he was an opportunity, and every single person in that garden was recalculating what he could do for them. And not one of them had changed their opinion of him as a human being, because they had never had an opinion of him as a human being. He had never been a person to them. He had only ever been a category, and the category had just changed. Gregory Vance came pushing through the crowd, now red-faced blustering because men like Gregory believe that volume is a substitute for standing. Now hold on. What is this, some kind of Simone? Do you know what he's... Mr. Vance, Elias said, and he didn't raise his voice, and that was somehow worse than if he had. I've been meaning to speak with you. I didn't want to do it tonight. I really didn't. I wanted more than you can possibly understand for tonight to be a different kind of night. He reached into his jacket and took out a slim folded document, the spare, always the spare, and he held it without opening it. 3 months ago, your family defaulted on a senior loan. You know this. You've been dodging the bank's calls. What you don't know is that 6 weeks ago, that loan, along with the rest of your debt, was acquired as part of a portfolio by a fund. You've been trying to find out who's behind the fund. Your lawyers have been calling around all week. He paused. It's me, Gregory. I'm behind the fund. I've been holding the note on everything you own for 3 weeks, and I did not tell a single soul because I was trying right up until 9:41 tonight to find a reason not to use it. The silence in that garden was total. Even the band had stopped. I didn't buy your debt to hurt you, Elias went on, and now he was talking to Simone, only to Simone, though 200 people heard every word. It came in a stack. I didn't even know it was yours at first. And when I found out, I sat on it because I actually thought that I was about to marry into this family, and you don't destroy the people you love even when you can. So I decided to wait. I decided to give it one more test, one more chance to find out whether the woman I proposed to loved a man in a plain shirt or whether she loved the fog. He looked at the pool. And you answered me. You threw the answer in the water in front of 200 people, and you smiled and you told me no one was coming to save me. He looked back up and his eyes were wet and his voice did not shake, which was worse. You were half right, Simone. No one was coming to save me because I never needed saving. I'm the one who was going to save you, all of you, and you couldn't be kind to me for one single night when you thought I had nothing. Here is where you expect the revenge. This is a revenge story you have been told. This is the moment. The powerful man crushes the people who humiliated him, forecloses on the mansion, empties the pool, salts the earth. And I will not lie to you, that version of the story is available. Elias Cole held to the balloon. He could have said the word, and by morning the Vance family would have been calling movers and lawyers, and it would have been legal, and a great many people watching would have said it was deserved. But that is not what happened, and the reason it is not what happened is the whole point of this story. Because Elias Cole had spent his entire adult life inside the fog, being smiled at by people who wanted his money, and he had built over decades one iron rule for himself. He would not become a man who used his power to make small people feel the way small people had once tried to make him feel. The instant he foreclosed on the Vances out of a broken heart, he would have become Gregory Vance. He would have become the thing that treats other human beings as line items to be crushed when convenient. And he had watched tonight exactly how ugly that looked from the outside on a woman's smiling face at the edge of a glowing pool. So he did not crush them. He opened the folded document, and he tore it in half, and then in half again, and he let the pieces fall onto the terrace stones. The note goes back to the bank at par tomorrow morning, he said loud enough for Renata to hear it and log it. I'm releasing it. Your family's mess is your family's mess again, Gregory. It always was. I'm not going to be the reason you lose everything, and I'm not going to be the reason you get to tell yourselves a story where I'm the villain and you're the victims. You'll sink or swim on your own, the way everyone does, the way I did. That's not mercy. It's just refusing to let you turn me into you." He turned to go. "Elias." Simone's voice cracked on his name. She was crying now, and it was real, and it was too late, and she knew both of those things. "Elias, wait. I didn't know. If I'd known." And he stopped and he turned back and he gave her the sentence that ended it, the one that this whole channel exists to deliver, the one you already know is true, even though it costs to hear it. "That's exactly the problem, Simone," he said quietly. "If you'd known. You would have been kind to me tonight if you'd known I was rich. You'd have caught the phone instead of throwing it. That's not love. That's an audit. Love is how you treat someone when you're certain they can't do anything for you. Tonight you were certain I was nobody, and you threw me in the pool along with the phone, and you smiled." He shook his head slowly. "I didn't want your father's money. I wanted to find one person who'd be kind to the man in the plain shirt. That's all I ever wanted. And I looked for her in you for 8 months, and she was never there. There was only ever the fog, and you loved the fog." He walked down the terrace steps across the gravel through the formation of his own people who fell in around him, and he got into the lead car, and the 12 SUVs pulled away down the long dark drive and out through the gates, and the taillights disappeared, and behind him, in a garden lit gold against the night, 200 people stood in a silence that no one dared to break, and a woman in a white dress stood at the edge of a glowing blue pool. And somewhere at the bottom of it, a phone lay dark, still holding, if anyone had cared to fish it out, the last call that Elias Cole ever took as a nobody. In the lead car going down the dark drive, Renata Ose sat across from him and said nothing for a long minute, and Elias was grateful for it, because she was the closest thing he had to a friend, and she knew when a silence was load-bearing. Finally she said, "You tore up the note." "I did. The board's going to ask why." 2 years of work went into that portfolio. The Vance position was clean margin. "Tell the board," Elias said, watching the gates open ahead of them, "that the principal made a judgment call about reputational exposure." He almost smiled. "And then off the record tell them the truth. Tell them I stood in a garden tonight and watched what a person looks like the instant they get power over someone who hurt them. And I did not like the look of it, and I decided I would rather lose the margin than wear that face." Renata studied him. She had been with him 11 years. She had seen him do ruthless things, necessary things, the kind of things you do to build an empire out of one truck. This was not that. "You loved her," she said. "It was not a question." "I loved the idea that she was the one who'd be kind to the nobody," Elias said. "That's not the same thing. It took me 8 months and a phone in a pool to learn the difference." He looked out the window at the dark trees going by. "Do me a favor, Renata. The next time I decide to test somebody by lying to them about who I am, remind me how tonight went. Remind me that you don't find honest people by hiding. You only find your own fear wearing their face." "I'll put it in the file," Renata said dryly, and Elias laughed, really laughed for the first time all night, and something in his chest that had been clenched for 8 months finally slowly let go. Now let me tell you what happened after, because you'll want it. Elias Cole released the note as he said he would at par the next morning, and the Vance family did not go bankrupt, and they did not thank him because people like that never do. Within a year they had told the story so many times that in their version, Elias was a scheming social climber who had infiltrated their family under false pretenses and been rightly expelled, and they believed it because believing it was more comfortable than the truth. And the truth was standing at the bottom of a swimming pool. Gregory Vance's balloon deflated slowly over the following years, the way over-leveraged balloons do, with no help and no sabotage from Elias, simply from the weight of a family that had forgotten how to build anything and remembered only how to spend. Simone married someone the family approved of, someone with the right name and the right fog, and I am told it did not make her happy, though I do not know that, and I will not pretend to. There is one more thing about Simone I have to tell you, because people always ask. 2 years after the party, she wrote Elias a letter. Not an email, a letter in her own hand, which surprised him. It was 3 pages long, and most of it was the kind of thing you would expect: self-justification, braided with apology. An explanation of how she had been raised, how the family expected her to marry a certain kind of person, how she had been performing for them and had not meant the cruelty. He read all 3 pages standing in his kitchen. And then he got to the last paragraph, And the last paragraph was different because in it, she stopped defending herself and wrote one true sentence, the only fully true sentence in the letter. And it was this: I keep thinking about the phone at the bottom of the pool, and how the worst part isn't that I threw it. It's that I felt powerful when I did, and I have never once in my life felt powerful, except by making someone else feel small. And I am only now too late starting to understand that that is not power at all, and that you knew it, and that is why you tore up the note. Elias read that paragraph twice. Then he folded the letter and he did not write back because there was nothing left to say, but he kept it because it was the closest thing to growth he ever saw come out of that whole family, and he believed on principle in keeping the evidence when a person finally tells the truth. Elias did not marry for a long time. He carried the night around inside him like a stone. But he did one thing differently afterward, and it changed his life, and it is the thing I most want to leave you with. He stopped testing people. He had thought for years that the plain shirt was a way of finding honest love, that if he could just get someone to like the nobody, he'd know it was real. But standing in that garden, he'd understood the test had been the whole poison. You cannot find an honest person by lying to them about who you are and waiting to catch them. All you find that way is the reflection of your own fear. So he stopped. He told the next woman who mattered to him exactly who he was on the first evening. Everything, the empire, and the loneliness, and the fog, and he let her decide with her eyes open, and he watched terrified to see whether she'd flinch. She didn't flinch. She said the fog sounded exhausting, and asked if he'd ever just, done a normal thing, gone to a diner, ordered badly, and he laughed so hard he almost cried, and that not the plain shirt, not the test, is how Elias Cole finally got out of the fog, not by hiding what he had, by finding someone who looked straight at all of it and reached for the man anyway. Her name was Daisy, and she ran a community clinic that Elias's foundation had years earlier, and anonymously helped to fund, though neither of them knew that when they met. She was not impressed by money, having spent her career watching money fail to fix the things that actually break people. On their third evening together, when Elias, terrified, finally confessed the full scale of what he was, she had listened, and then she had put down her fork and said, "So let me understand, you have all of that, and you spent years lying to people about it so they'd like you for free, and it never once occurred to you that the lying was the reason it never worked." And Elias had sat there with his mouth open, because in one sentence this woman had said the truest thing anyone had said to him in 20 years. She did not want his empire. She found his empire mildly embarrassing, if anything, a lot of grown people in suits moving boxes around. What she wanted was the man who had started with one truck and slept in the cab. The man underneath all the fog, and she reached for him with both hands and never once let the money get between them. They married quietly. No 200 guests, no band, no pool. Renata came, and Elias's mother, who is old now, and still could not quite believe the flat above the laundry had led here, and about a dozen people who had known Elias before any of it, and loved him anyway. He wore a plain shirt. Elias said it suited him. So here's what the pool taught him, and what I'll hand to you before I let you go. Watch how people treat you when they are certain you can do nothing for them. That is the only reliable information you will ever get about a human being. Everyone is kind to the useful. Everyone catches the phone when they think it's important. But the person who is warm to the waiter, gentle to the stranger, decent to the one in the plain shirt at the edge of the party, that is a person operating without an audience and without an angle, and that is the only kind of person worth loving, worth trusting, worth building a life beside. Simone Vance threw a phone in a pool because she was certain the man in front of her was nobody. She was giving Elias the truest thing she had. He was just wise enough finally to read it. And one more thing, because it's the part people forget. When you turn out to be the powerful one, when the SUVs turn out to be yours, the test is not whether you can crush the people who mocked you. Of course you can. The test is whether you refuse to. Elias tore up the note not because the Vances deserved mercy, but because he refused to let his broken heart turn him into the very thing that broke it. That is the harder power. Anyone can drown a family in debt. It takes a real man to hold the pin to the balloon and walk away. If this story hit you somewhere real, subscribe. Because someone out there is being treated like a nobody tonight in a plain shirt at the edge of somebody's shining party, and they need to hear that the quiet ones are not the weak ones, and that the smiling cruelty of powerful people is not a verdict on your worth. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever watched someone show you exactly who they were the moment they thought you couldn't do anything for them? I read every one. Until next time, watch how they treat the man in the plain shirt. It's always the answer.